Couple caveats, just some disclaimers to keep my wife, CEO, and happy. I don't speak on behalf of our clinic. I'm not your doctor or your clinicians. And child in crisis, please go see a licensed professional. And the opinions that I express today are opinions and most certainly not psychological advice. And just getting in with our agenda, I'm going to start off with just 3 basic concepts that the United States Secret Service taught us: speed, direction, and diagnosis. So as parents, if you walk out of here with anything, these 3 concepts: speed, direction, and diagnosis. And then I will get in and quickly introduce the Parent as Expert suicide prevention model. It's a roadmap for recognition, not politics or public policy. And one thing I want to get out of it is to destroy the concept of guilt and blame within parents and children. Something that media has missed, I'm going to introduce just one concept that has never been broadcast in the media. There are no transcripts about it in the Utah State Board of Education, and it's just not talked about. And it's the most simple, powerful, and important peer-reviewed research that I think that you will ever see. And just some final thoughts on humility, courage, and 13 reasons why that controversy. And I'm going to end on a personal message of hope. Jerry Parr was a former Secret Service agent and a protector to President Reagan, and I'm just going to let him speak.
The 1963 assassination of John F. Kennedy was still fresh in the minds of the Secret Service, and in its wake there had been a string of violence. The shootings of Martin Luther King Jr., Robert F. Kennedy, Governor George Wallace, and 2 assassination attempts on Gerald Ford. 2 decades of gunfire that had taught the Secret Service one lesson above all: move fast.
Move fast. First concept as a parent of expert with your own children in a mental health crisis: move quickly, very quickly. And that is important because suicidal acts rise with the longer the duration of high-risk stakes, and it makes common sense. The more that your child is involved with trauma and crisis, the higher the risk for suicide. So speed is the first concept.
But about DuPont Circle, or maybe just under DuPont Circle, we started spitting up this blood, profuse amounts of red, bright red, frothy blood. I thought, well, what would cause that? Maybe landing on top of him cracked the rib. Maybe it punctured a lung.
That was when Parr made the single most important decision of the day.
Roger, we want those to the emergency room, George Washington.
Forget the White House, get to a hospital.
Forget the White House, get to the hospital. Secret Service agent Parr was a resident expert of his own president that he was taking care of. Conventional wisdom had it that he was supposed to drive President Reagan to the White House. He made the decision on the spot to go immediately to George Washington Hospital, which brings the next concept: direction. When you have a child in crisis, speed is important, and direction is also very important. And the person to make that call is you, parent as experts on the ground level. That is shared through peer-reviewed research. Just how much of an integral part parents play in the role when they are dealing with their own children in crises. And this says children with profound multiple disabilities. It is my preposition that children suffering from depression, mood disorders, and anxiety Those are profound disabilities, and parents are, as experts, are in the best position to take care of that.
Decision to bring Reagan straight to a modern trauma facility made all the difference.
We knew he lost about 40, 50% of his blood volume with minimal blood pressure. He was 70 years old. I think that would have been a very critical issue if he had not gone directly to GW.
Speed, direction, and diagnosis and conceptualization. Those are the three concepts I want you to keep in mind as I go through the Parents as Expert model, but more on conceptualization. Anybody? What's this? Church. Nice, comfortable church. During a rainy day, you could go in and just relax, worship with the Lord. Here's another view. Again, church with a closer view. We start to see something happening with your initial conceptualization of church. Looking even further. Not exactly a warm, comfortable place to sit in. Even closer. Not exactly a church. And the closest, that's from the inside. Conceptualization is key, and that depends upon your viewpoint as well as diagnosis. The people who are handling your children, the proclaimed experts, how are they conceptualizing your children in a moment of crisis? Is it that, when in reality, your child is there? Speed, direction, diagnosis, and conceptualization. And as we get into the model here, there's a lot of stuff going around in media and about the causes of suicide. We're not going to spend much time with that. I've just listed 1, 2, 3, 4, just 5 off the cuff here around these areas. We're not going to spend time with that. I could name 20. You could probably name 20 more. But one thing that all those things have in common, the bottom line is they all result in trauma, regardless of the reasons down here below. It all ends up in trauma. And when your child is in a situation of trauma, it goes back down to the concept of speed. As the parent of expert of your own children, it is very important when your child is in a place of trauma to immediately take care of them. As I mentioned before, suicide appears to be related to the amount of time that they spend in high-risk states. So time and speed. If your child is in crisis, you don't want to wait for the school counselor or for any counselor or for a politician to come. The amount of time that they spend in high-risk states really, if this is your child's in crisis, this is a causal factor of suicide or whatever is going on with your child, you don't want to wait. As a parent, you quickly get rid of the source of trauma. And as a ground level parent, you are at the best position to act quickly and to put your child in a safe place. So after trauma, we're looking at, it runs into any of these areas here. Depression, mood disorders, anxiety, and so forth. And that again goes down to direction. Who are you going to take your child to figure out what is going on? There are lots of, the mental health is just filled with a lot of experts. You'll have your school counselors, your therapists, the experts on the radio. Our children are complex. I'm just at a loss for words because children are so complex, and it is just so important that whatever direction you go to, that you take your children to people that they know exactly what is going on with your child. In other words, the diagnosis. Because the last thing you want is have an expert or a school conceptualize your child as this, when in reality, that's your child. And again, back up to the model here. We have a picture of a brain, because all of these disorders here, they affect the brain. And specifically, in terms of depression, the hippocampus actually literally shrinks in the brain. And I'll redact this out. This is a healthy hippocampus. Oops. This is a healthy hippocampus, and you can see the size there, and that's with a child who is not depressed. And this is a depressed hippocampus, and it is much smaller. Peer-reviewed research is clear with us that stress literally shrinks the brain, and brain injury and trauma also increase your child's risk for suicide. And then once your brain has shrunk, you enter in what is called a cloud, what I call a cloud of despair. Through depression, anxiety, or mood disorders, you literally lose function of your prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for rational thought. And that's where the blame comes in for children who commit suicide. There is no blame. They literally have lost their minds. When they have reached this point of trauma and have gone through depression, mood anxieties, or disorders, and they've reached that cloud of despair, they have absolutely no idea what is going on. They're not literally responsible for their actions. And so, given the amount of, as I just discussed, the amount of trauma going on to the brain, we don't want to add additional stressors to kids in despair. But what are we doing? We know that children and teens suicides are related to the school calendar. And this is what I talked about earlier. That has never, ever been discussed in a Utah State Board of Education meeting. You cannot find it anywhere, in any websites, in any public school, not only in Utah, but in the nation. And there is peer-reviewed research to back that up. It's not just my opinion. Recent research in 2011, the seasonality of youth suicide in the academic calendar. More recent, in 2015, do emergency pediatric psych visits for danger to self and others correspond to times of school attendance? This next slide will be embedded in your mind for a long time. This is the average of number of emergency psychiatric visits in a Connecticut hospital in a children's mental health center. Now, if you notice, these are the months of January, February, March, April, May, and they have the highest amounts of child suicides. If you see the green here, that's summer. When the kids are not in school, they are at less risk. And here's something else. In these months here, which has the highest rates of suicide, what's going on in Utah schools all over the nation during that time? Yep, SAGE test. During those times, right here. And it is never talked about, period. And that's the SAYS test. We now call it the whatever, I'm not even gonna mention it, the RISE tests. But we know these tests have a direct effect on the mental health of our children. Vomiting, anxiety, suicide, and especially anxiety. And these are just some of the different anxieties that can occur when kids are subjected to testing. Post-traumatic stress disorder, acute stress disorder, adjustment disorders, other specified traumas, blah, 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 blah. This isn't child's play. This isn't something that when your child exhibits some of these things, that you go into a school counselor and the school counselor says, oh, it's nothing. It is not nothing. This is serious stuff. Because when you get to that point, that's when you get to the cloud, go from the cloud of despair to literal suicide ideations for these kids. So you might be asking yourself, and I know at times I asked myself years ago, if there's data that suggests that literal school attendance can sometimes kill some of these kids, why isn't the board doing anything? Why aren't politicians speaking out about it? And I used to just think, well, they're either two things. They're either evil or they're idiots. And it's not that. And I think it's because, well, I know it's because it's confirmation bias. And basically what confirmation bias is, it's interpreting new events using long-held expectations and beliefs. Confirmation bias, our brains favor existing ideals and dampen conflicts. And so if I went in front of the board and literally presented this peer-reviewed research to them, their confirmation bias would be so high, their brain is wired just in such a way that supports their beliefs. It is literally a blind spot in their brain. Their brain can't handle it. So they are neither evil nor stupid. And for all of us, we spend 36% more time reading about ideals that we already believe in. And so what happens if we're only exposed to like-minded ideas? Well, during my residency in San Francisco, I spent 10 years there. I was there during the Obama times in 2008, and that's me with my wife at a Obama fundraiser, and I voted for him back then. But it was a different world in San Francisco. It is so insulated. That's all I knew. And then I moved here. And this became all I knew. So I challenge each and every one of you to challenge your own confirmation biases, because existing beliefs are reinforced by affirmative feedback loop in our brains. Be open. I ran for school board 2 years ago, and it was just on a simple platform. Your child, your voice, your choice. And one reason I ran was because of this guy. He decided it wasn't my child, it wasn't my choice, and my voice didn't matter. And personally, that affected me directly with one of my children, who was undergoing severe anxiety at that time. And I ran across some, I'm trying to keep her privacy, but I found some information which made me believe that she was in serious danger. And she was just too stressed out. Her counselor had asked her to take a an advanced placement test, and it was just too much. And so I sent her in there to have the class drop. The counselor said no. Then I sent in her tutor to represent me. The counselor said no. And then I went in there, and the counselor said no. And then I made him famous. 48 hours later, he was in the front page of the Tribune. In one quote, I said, "In reality, I should have been able to walk into my child's counseling office and say, hey, my kid's struggling. Let's just drop the class." He, the counselor, should have said, "You're the parent. You're in charge of your own student." And that wasn't the case. So in terms of my daughter, she had an academic pressure, which resulted in a resultant trauma, and it exhibited itself through anxiety, and she had reached a cloud of despair. I had to do something as a parent quickly, so speed, and then direction. I didn't fight to have my daughter taken out. She was done. I was the parent, end of story. That was the direction I took. And so speed, direction, and in terms of my child. And the public school had perceived my child and conceptualized my child as this. And had they continued with that conceptualization, my child would have been dead, because the reality of my child, that's where she was. They missed the diagnosis. They missed the conceptualization. And something else that Hollywood has misconceptualized, and I just want to briefly touch on.
In 2007, 13 Reasons Why by novelist Jay Asher outlined the story of a 16-year-old girl named Hannah Baker. In the book, Hannah recounts from beyond the grave the high school gossip, humiliation, bullying, invasion of privacy, betrayal, and sexual assault that led to her suicide. In the spring of 2017, 13 Reasons Why became an even more popular 13-episode series on Netflix. However, suicide experts say that a series aimed at discouraging child and teen suicide might have the opposite effect.
Might have the opposite effect? It did have the opposite effect. We hate 13 Reasons Why. I'll speak on behalf of Joan, even without talking to her. I know she's a licensed psychotherapist. I can tell you right now, she's probably not a fan of 13 Reasons Why. And 13 Reasons Why literally focuses on all this Hollywood drama around all these things down here and resultant trauma, and then they skip to the suicide. What they skip entirely and do not mention is that the act of suicide is not normal. The act of suicide is the result of a mental illness. Hollywood and 13 Reasons Why ignore everything, do not discuss depression, mood disorders, anxiety. They are literally glorifying the act of suicide for these kids. Asked my wife, who's a licensed clinical psychologist, should I ever watch it? She watched it because she had to. She had clients who had seen it. And she looked at me and just gave me this look in her eye, and she said, "Gary, I don't ever want you to watch that show. It is that traumatizing and triggering." 13 Reasons Why ignores the realities behind what is going on with our children in school. I wish I had more time, but I just want to close with one quote. There's a child or a teen out there who is struggling and who may be watching this videotape. If there is something that I could leave with you, I just want to leave you with this. Do not speak badly of yourself. For the warrior that is inside you hears your words and is lessened by them. You are strong. You are brave. There is a nobility of spirit within you. Please let it grow. Thank you.